Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Florida City and County Management Association webinar entitled Using Enterprise Funds as a Management Tool. My name is Bob Lee and I have the honor to again serve as your host today. Joining me as co-host.
Can't hear you, Al, Bob.
You can't hear me here? Well, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Bob.
Oh, okay. Might have been something there on technical in there, Steve. Anyways, I wanted to, thanks for mentioning it though, and in the event there was a problem. I wanted to also introduce Dr. Dina Hurst and Mr. Mike Ryko. Dina and Mike both work with the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government, and they provide the technical support for both the panelists as well as the attendees who may have something problematic that happens to be on our end. But they can guide you if you have some other connections in terms of how to connect. Sponsors, or I should say co-sponsors for the FCCMA webinar today include the Florida League of Cities, the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government, the Center for Florida Local Government Excellence, and three corporate sponsors, Government Services Group, Strategic Government Resources, and Granigus. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Kennedy. Steve is the city manager of the city of Green Grove Springs and also the member of the Professional Development Committee for FCCMA. And today he's going to serve as our moderator. Steve, if you wouldn't mind, please do a self-introduction and also introduce our panelists and ask them to do the same. And welcome all of you again to participating, and thank you for the time you've been devoting so far in preparing for this session. Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks to you and Dina and Mike for all your support of getting the webinar in place. As you mentioned, Steve Kennedy, City of Green Cove Springs manager. I've been in Green Cove for a little over 3 years. However, I've been in the government management business for over 45. Part of my love for this topic, the utility transfers, is that I've spent 41 of those years involved with utilities and having the request all the time from the general fund side, give us money. So I was involved with a lot of that. I also spent some time with MEAG Power. I know Julie will recognize that name, but it's the equivalent of FMPA here in Florida, Joint Action Agency. We had 48 members, and when I was there, I worked with rates and participant relations and then plant accounting. As I said, been in finance, director and city manager capacities for 41 years and have enjoyed it. Another part that brings into the transfers, how important they are, is I also worked with in the various locations with economic development and how you pull the economic development impact from utilities and how a tool, how much of a management tool it is to get economic development, more industrial type. And again, also when I was working in Georgia relative to the utility side of the house, I was able to have a good fortune of working with 2 of the top 5 utilities, municipal utilities in the state of Georgia. So that sums me up. And in order to keep with the normal thing, I will go ladies first. Julie, I'd ask if you would give us a background of yourself, and then Al, if you would follow Julie, and then Jeff will wrap us up on this part of the program.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. My name is Julie Crawford. I am the Director of Financial Planning and Analysis at JEA, the Municipal Utility in Jacksonville. I've been with JEA a little bit more than 13 years now, but I've worked for municipal utilities my whole career and generally in the finance and financial planning area. Right now, I have budget areas under my umbrella as well as financial planning and rates, and I'm happy to be here.
There you go. Hey, everybody, I'm Al Minner. I'm city manager here in Leesburg, Florida. I've been in Leesburg just a little over 8 years now, 25 years as a city manager. Little bit less time than Steve, but I would say that most of my time is with municipal electric utilities as well. Probably not quite 20 of the 25 years, but in Vandalia, Missouri, as well as here in Florida, in Fort Meade and Leesburg. So that's my background.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Jeff Branch. I'm the Senior Legislative Advocate with the Florida League of Cities. I've been with the league for almost 5 years, but been in this political process and worked, state, local, federal for almost the past 17 years. At the league, I handle transportation, housing, and emergency disaster issues. But this year took on a couple new issues to assist with my colleague Rebecca, who had a lot of big issues this particular session. And so got this issue in December and I've been learning ever since. And so I'm happy to be here, participate in this webinar with all of you all.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Al and Julie, and thanks again for taking your time to participate with us. We have a number of questions that we're going to pose to the group, and we'll provide time for the responses. And just so that we do not risk having a question that doesn't get answered, feel free, participants, to send your questions in, and we'll have somebody monitoring that. And so we'll try to move forward with the answering and responding to questions. And I guess at the end, if there are still questions, you could coordinate with Bob and the others, and we can get those questions answered for you. And again, we all are dealing with those that are in the utility business as well as those that are in government, and the dependence on utility transfers for our existence in some cases. It's important for us to establish kind of where we are and what we're really working with. And so the first question or first request that we had is to describe the utilities your agency is responsible for, include, among other things, size of the budget, number of customers, interagency agreements, and other related financial matters. And we're going a certain order, but the way this was put in, my information came up first. So I will cover the Green Cove operation data and briefly, and then we'll move to Julie and then to Al. As you can see, we have the three main utilities. We do have stormwater and solid waste, if you want to look at those as solid waste as utility, but these are the three major ones. Again, electric system, 4,400 customers, current year revenue, 12.5 million, annual sales, 111 million. Our peak demand is 23.5 megawatts. And our transfer to general fund from electric is 850. And I just put the highlight there on the right to show, and we'll talk about that in a minute, about the transfer policy, and we'll get to that. But you can see in our case, which I'm very proud of, that we're only utilizing about half of our authority from the electric system to make our transfers. Water, 6,200 customers, current year revenues 1.75, annual sales in gallons about 400 million. Then our transfer from general fund from water is about 64,000. You can see we are authorized for 227.5. Wastewater, same amount of the customers, $3.2 million budget, and our transfer from wastewater is 100,000 out of a possible 130. And part of the format that we have here is that we're discussing what's the best approach and what would be most interesting. So if you're wondering why we have the Green Cove and then Leesburg and then JEA, we're trying to go from a smaller utility to a middle size, and I'm not insulting Jeff or Al rather, with that, but based on, where they are, they're about 4 to 5 times our size. And then we have JEA, which is way beyond all of ours. So that's the reason for having the other two utilities, to give us a disparity of philosophies maybe and policy. So I think the next slide goes to Julie, and we'll let her cover the I'm sorry, I got way off base. Al, you're next.
Goes, okay. Well, the Leesburg electric system, Leesburg also has, I kind of kept it centered on electric, but up our way, Leesburg's kind of known as the little city that runs a utility. So we have electric, water, sewer, and a gas utility. And I didn't spend too much time on the other water, wastewater, gas. So I'll just stick with utility, the electric system. So we are a distribution utility. We serve kind of northwest Lake County up there by the Harris chain. Our electric system was established in 1926. I think that's important to point out because a lot of the investor-owned utilities kind of will think that they've been in the business and they know more about the electric industry than us cities. But really the fact of the matter is that when rurification or electrification started in the United States, it was really the cities that started it, and little cities like Leesburg, Jacksonville, right, back in the day, and Green Cove. It was our city fathers that went out and issued debt and put together old diesel engines to generate electricity because we were the rural areas and you couldn't make any money serving rural areas and running 15, 20 miles of wire to serve one house, but the cities did and the co-ops did. So you'll see our established dates for service are really early. Wait till you see Jacksonville. So our distribution was established in 1926. We're a distribution utility. We have 27,000 customers. I would say probably 60% of those are outside of our city limits. We're about 75% residential. We have a $70 million annual budget. Of that 70 million, more than half of it is our wholesale costs. So we are one of the cities in the All Requirements Project by that FMPA, the Florida Municipal Power Agency, kind of operates. Our peak is about 120 megawatts. We sell about 500 million kilowatts. We have 50 employees, and our system is operated and managed by the Leesburg City Commission ultimately. And just like as Steve was saying, I think you kind of note too that municipal electric utilities kind of stay on the small side, like that population of a city of 25,000 or so. So you see we're about 4 times bigger than Steve's utility. And that we're kind of, and we're Leesburg, I guess, is considered kind of a middle-sized utility, but from our size, you really jump. So I'm not going to steal any of Julie's thunder, but there's a big stepping stone from Leesburg, and then you hit the big guys like OUC, KUA, JEA. And so with that, Julie, show them your numbers.
Thank you, Al. And like it was mentioned, you can see on the right there, we do have quite a broad span of geography that our territory covers. We serve electric, water, sewer, and a little bit of chilled water. And we've been an electric system since 1895. We're pretty proud of that number. And the JEA has been an independent agency of the city since 1968. The way we're structured is the utility has a 7-member board. 4 are appointed by the city council president and 3 are appointed by the mayor, and then they all are confirmed by city council. So it truly is an independent agency. Just for scope, average number of electric accounts as of last year is getting close to 500,000, and our revenues of 1.3 billion. And then on the water side, a little bit lower, around 373,000 water customers, and then a little bit less, that are attached to sewer, and revenues of about $500 million.
Thank you, ma'am. And I only see one chat notice, and if there's any questions anyone would like to bring up, please do so. But we will, in an effort to keep your time allocation for the webinar tight, we will continue to move forward. And I think a big part of the webinar and the title was using the utility transfers as a management tool. And that includes a lot of different parts. And you have, some of the points that were listed to be discussed are having a utility system integrity is a priority before you transfer out. In other words, make sure your system is in good order before you just start sending money to the general fund. And then again, transfers, using transfers versus ad valorem millage rates, payment in lieu of taxes for utilities, the basis of transfers, franchise fees, administrative charges associated with general fund services that the utility reimburses the general fund for. And then if there are utility rate differentials for service, I know Al mentioned that 60% of their folks are out of the city limits. We're not quite that number, but we do have individuals, customers that are outside of our city limits, but are within our designated service area. And then part of the other points to be discussed was a legislative perspective, of which Jeff will pick up with us. And there's a lot of thoughts about the transfer of policies. They're relative to budget transfers and related financial issues. And the question that we have here is to discuss all of that policy, the formulas, if so, and then discuss the reasoning for the policies. And I know that from as many as I have worked with or seen some policies, they're different. And it's based a lot on the operation itself. It's based on the understanding of your governing body. Do they really understand how the utility is supposed to operate and what you're doing to the utility when you request certain transfers? So based on our rotation this time, I pulled the presentation out so I won't make a mistake like I did before. Julie is second this time, and so I will let her move forward with the policy and formula the JEA uses to calculate their transfer. And then I will be second, and Al will clean up for us. Julie?
Sure. Thank you. The formula for what we contribute each budget year is established in an interagency agreement. Currently, our agreement is through fiscal year 23, and that's really, really helpful to have an agreement that's established for a certain period of time. So it's not questioned, it's not under negotiation, it just is the formula. And then at the end of that agreement, then you do the hard work of establishing what the next agreement will be. Since ours expires at the end of 23 and we're currently budgeting for 23, we will start having those conversations again pretty soon. But as for now, we follow the formula. I tried to put some math up here so I could illustrate how it is we decide what we are giving over to the city each year through our budget. The first step, and you can see the letter A next to the math and then also the verbiage that's directly from our agreement, is really a millage calculation. And we have a certain millage that's multiplied against kilowatt hours sold, and then also a millage multiplied by kgals of potable water and sewer sold. And it gets a little bit specific in that verbiage as to exactly what those numbers are. And those are multiplied and we come to a total. As you can see for 21, that total was a little over $118 million. However, we also have a clause in there, and that's under letter B, that has a floor calculation. So back in 2016, when this version of the agreement was established, we set a floor, and it's not, it's a little bit different than just having a required increase every year. The floor is based on fiscal year 16, and you can see that with the parentheses, it's a base year. So that base year increases 1% every year. And so you can see that for 21, that floor was $120 million. So we do that math as well, and then choose the bigger, the max of the two. So really what our fiscal year 21 contribution was $120 million, since our millage did not calc higher than the base floor year. And that's really how it was negotiated and decided on. Going forward, all of the things that Steve mentioned are the things that we'll be looking at as we decide with the city what that formula will look like going forward. And it involves a lot of projections and forecasts, the financial health of the utility and where we see sales going in the future. So we'll have a lot of that work to do going forward, so that we can make sure that we're sustaining that general fund and, you know, giving a healthy contribution, but also maintaining things like financial metrics. The rating agencies look at a lot of metrics that include city contributions. So it will be a robust discussion coming up. But as for now, that is currently how we budget for our contribution every year.
Okay, next slide, Mike. All right, I didn't get crazy with highlighting. I was trying to do the making sure that the key points were addressed, and you didn't have to try to feel like you had to read the whole document. And again, some policies, some transfer policies are going to be very complex, like the one for JEA. Ours is pretty straightforward. Originally, when it was established in '95, the adopted rate was 10% of the prior year's combined electric, water, wastewater revenues coming out of the annual audit. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing exotic about that. Those numbers, you have the transparency of the audit, having been audited, so you know they're dependable, reliable numbers. But in 2014, there was a change to the formula only in the percentage. The transfer formula number went up to 13%. And to me, that's getting, from a personal perspective, that's getting up there pretty high. And I know that Al has a couple on his that I won't reference, but I think there's a level and a range of a transfer that makes the most sense that you normally could defend to your ratepayers as well as your taxpayers. But very straightforward, 13% of the audited financial report. And if you remember on the first slide that I had relative to the data about the city, I had the number on the far right, which is what we are would be by ordinance allowed to transfer versus what we were actually transferring. And a lot of that is based on the fact that having worked and been in the finance director position and during some of the career, you've got to balance that. And a lot of the transfer is not just we need X amount of money. We need to transfer regardless. What my philosophy has always been is that the electric systems cost or the water or wastewater systems cost. And I'll touch on that a little bit later when we give some takeaway comments, but all of those costs should be covered before you start looking at making a transfer. If your electric system is, or your utility system is suffering and is not being kept up, eventually the ability to make that transfer is not going to be there. So it's the old adage of, the goose laying the golden egg. If you don't keep feeding the goose, your eggs are going to get a lot worse and a lot less plentiful. So as we look at this, the last item there that's highlighted, there is the caveat, which is what we work under, is in any fiscal year where an amount not required to support the service levels are less, then that amount will be transferred. So they covered it on both ends, but we historically, there have been some high transfer amounts in the past, and those have gone down significantly in the last 3 to 5, 6 years. So again, very simple, very straightforward. Yeah, or Al?
Yeah, okay, so for us, we're reasonably formal, and I think what you'll find as the utility gets bigger, they get more formal and complex. Like Julie showed with JEA, they have that millage kind of formula and very specific. And as the bigger utilities like JEA, KUA, they seem to be a little more autonomous. So their operations are housed in their authorities, but they're always rooted back to the general fund and the elected officials through that transfer. So don't let their autonomy fool you. They're still one of us, but they get obviously they negotiate it more and they get more formal. Then as it seems like as the utility gets smaller, there's a little more fluff and a little more grabbing of the money. So our utility is our concept is to, Steve said it a little bit, be a utility first. So citywide, we have a $175 million budget. Our general fund is really only 28 million of the 175. The electric fund is 70 of the 175. So there's two ways that we use electric monies for general purposes. One is obviously the transfer and the other is the cost allocations. 40% of the general fund, so 40% of that 28 million is made up somehow of some type of transfer, whether electric, water, sewer, gas. 3 million is a direct of that 40%. I think that number was it's like around 9 mil or 8 mil. Of that, 3 million is the direct transfer from the electric fund. Now we have a policy that's set by ordinance on the transfer that caps all of the transfers from all the enterprise funds at a maximum of 10%. And water, sewer, gas does 10%. Electric does not. The policy says we can do 10, but we do 6%. So that 3 million represents 6% of electric operating revenue. And that's a magic number because those of you guys, who you're not municipal electric utilities, but you get a 6% franchise fee for the rights that you have sold, your franchising rights, and the right to use your right of ways. So you have probably an agreement with your investor-owned utility. You probably have an agreement with your local co-op, and you get 6% of their operating revenue. So that's where we like to keep our transfer. We've worked really hard the last 5 years to get it down, the transfer down from about 9.8% to that 6%. Then we have the cost allocations. Like if you were an investor-owned utility, Florida Power or Tampa Electric, they spend money on attorneys, they spend money on general management, they have their own HR divisions, they have their own fleet operations that's all conglobulated into their cost. So we do the same thing. So the general fund then uses the electric fund uses the general fund for its general services. So they have to pay a fleet charge, they have to pay a charge for the city attorney, HR, legal, IT. And so that's really a matrix, and we set that by resolution. So transfer is ordinance. The matrix on cost allocation is by resolution that we monitor every year. And it's basically the guys in finance, they're in the IT, and all that. They basically keep track of how much they spend and how much of their time they spend in each of the different funds. And then we break that cost down over payroll costs. So if 60% of IT is spent in electric, 60% of their payroll is then, or 60% of their budget is then allocated to the electric fund, and they pay that. So that's only a $2 million cost allocation. So the electric fund pays a little bit more than that, but I kept it general fund specific. So they pay about 3 million in a direct transfer, and they pay about 2 million in cost allocations. our organizational policy, again, we was the matrix on the cost allocation by resolution and the transfer by ordinance. Then I threw a couple of things down there just to remember. We try to be a utility first. Take care of all the electric stuff and all that stuff before you start transferring. Keep rates competitive. The last few years, several years, the markets and the margins, they're not like, and I'm almost going to put a line in the sand and say 2000 is about when it changed from wholesale costs started going up. There was a big jump in natural gas. Natural gas is about, I think the number is about 75% of the fuel matrix in the state of Florida. So when natural gas rates go up, energy rates go up. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind, because about 2000, you saw a big change in wholesale costs, $40, $50 a megawatt to it got as high as 80, 85 around the 2010 timeframe ish. So when those numbers start getting high, you need to be competitive there. Those are your margin numbers. That's the play money. So in Leesburg, it's interesting because we would talk to some of the old guard, and the philosophy there was just take it from electric, let the rate go high. When I got to Leesburg, our rate was in the neighborhood of $135 a megawatt. That was expensive. GRU was probably the highest in the state, around 145. We work really hard to get that number down to 105. Now we're floating around 120. So that comes back to this, it's not a cash cow anymore. You have got to be a utility first. There's constant competition. Florida Power really drives the train on that. And there are just a few things in the industry. A, shrinking market. B, we've gotten smarter with how we make energy or use energy rather. So, your LG TV with your super duper light there doesn't use as many kilowatts. And so when we saw growth kind of stop and we built tons of capacity around the state, whether you're an investor owned, a co-op or a muni, we had a lot of capacity. And that charged environment of wholesale costs going up, capacity, and people not using as much electricity as they did in the 90s created this atmosphere of competition that I think FPL brought on, where they would start picking on cities who weren't competitive. So when those old timers, sorry for that, maybe that was too direct, but when those old timer city commissioners would say, we just always rob from the general fund or electric fund, I'm going to be like, well, do you want to be like Vero Beach and have FPL knocking on your door? Because one of the biggest things that is important about municipal power, there's this transfer issue. I will tell you it's not a cash cow and you have to be competitive, but probably the biggest advantage to municipal electric utilities is that you own and operate the system. We are the quickest getting up after storms. I can give you comparisons of that. We have more people per land mile. I think our systems are more efficient. They're engineered differently, and that makes them more resilient during storms. And we get the power back up, at least in Lake County, quicker than our investor-owned utilities. I think there's a significant advantage when you do want to do the special project, like you want your downtown undergrounded, or you want your waterfront property undergrounded, or like in Winter Park, they'll tell you the big story when they struggled with Duke about how they wanted to get downtown Winter Park undergrounded, and they were really only able to do it until their franchise agreement run out and they took the system. So I think the biggest advantage on municipal systems is that you own and operate it, and you do those capital projects, and it really serves your general purposes when you're doing that improvement project.
Steve, may I
Yes, sir.
just for a moment, I just wanted to thank you all for showing the diversity and how you establish these rates. But I did want to touch on what Al has been talking about, because I think it's very, very important. and that involves justification of the rates that you have, not only from a competitive standpoint, but as you all know, you have bond requirements, bond covenants, debt service requirements. These are mandates that you use to justify. But when Al was talking about cost allocation, those people who may not be familiar with utilities and transfers and just how public finance works may not understand the importance of that cost allocation, in that these utilities should be charging for some of the city council's time, some of the city manager's time, some of the finance, HR, and these internal service funds that he referenced, IT, or fleet maintenance even, depending on what resources are being provided to these utilities from the general fund and your internal services funds. I mean, that is easily quantified. You can come up with a formula to do that, and helps justify the amount of transfer that you submit. In addition to the other formulas that you use, minimally, I would suggest you want to make sure you're retaining the cost, or at least reimbursing of the cost that you are putting in from the general fund to help support those utilities. So, Al, I think that when you covered that, and you covered it very, very well, that I think it's worth re-emphasizing again for those people who may not be that familiar with utilities and the transfer, that cost allocation is very, very important.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Bob, that's probably where our biggest fudge is. So when we set the transfer, everybody's watching the transfer. We keep that at that 6, and that's a franchise fee number. So we can defend that pretty well. On the cost allocation side, yeah, that's a little, we can tweak that a little bit. But like, for example, I brought out IT and legal, and like my salary in the city manager's office. We have probably about 80% of my office's expenses allocated out to the utilities. So the general fund is only picking up about 20% of the city manager. So that's probably maybe a little bit fat, but not by much. So we do help the general fund a little bit by getting a little fat on the cost allocations, but they're pretty formulaic, and they're important and justifiable.
And I think too, Bob, it's a good point that in the investor owned, somebody's got to be providing that service, and you either allow your utility operation, if you have this perspective, to ramp up and add staff to handle just their activity. But if you already have your IT operation, you already have your meter reading, you already have your customer service, you have your billing, all of those operations, whether it's a municipal owned or an investor owned, those functions have to be provided. And like Al was saying, our customer service, admin, reimbursement, whatever you want to label it, is around $900,000. And so again, that's an allocation. And now, if I could transfer 80% of my offices, we would get a lot more money. But
Well, see, what you
we don't do that.
when you go talk to the chief of police, you got to do that at lunch. That way you find out what's going on, and then it's not chargeable to the general fund because you were at lunch. So then you go back to the office and you're working on water and sewer, and you can allocate it out.
You have figured it out. That gray hair is well earned. Well, and I think a lot of the comments that to this point, related about philosophy and attitude, and just a general comment, and then we'll let Jeff. He's been anxiously waiting to just kind of relay all his wisdom to us. But if you look at it, and I always kind of touched on it, but an investor owned, they're going to pay shareholders. There are certain activities that are there that may not exist exactly in a municipal utility, but I mean, the city itself is taking a risk when they start up a utility. When way back when it was started, as Al said, you get some diesel generators, and you go to town. But, you have to, you start investing a lot of money in that. There is a reasonable expectation of a return. And that's where, I have always developed an approach that, while we don't want to be served by, we might want to emulate a little bit some of the characteristics of an investor owned when it comes to where we are rate wise. And but the other thing was I wanted to touch on, going back to before we leave the transfers, was that we developed the transfer policy in not really a formula, it's a percentage times revenue. But after discussing that with auditors and with other power type organizations, FUMPA, FMEA, so we wanted it to be something we could go back to and say this is a reasonable number. So I think we're in good shape time-wise. I will turn it over to Jeff. The third question that we have, and we sort of allocated the time for him because that's their business. That's
Hey,
what
you
they
gotta
do.
go back and show my great rate slide. I'm just kidding.
Yes, thank you. And the third question we have is discuss legislative issues important for local agencies who own and operate utilities. Be sure to explain the background on the issues and what local utility providers should be aware of regarding the impact from pending legislation. So I don't know if Al would have a desire. I know Julie earlier and I acknowledged that this is the expert, so we're going to let him make those comments. And then once we finish with Jeff, we've got one more part, which is kind of a wrap up and general comments. So Jeff, take it away.
Well, thank you. Because of all the great work you're doing with utilities, this session, Representative Find and Senator Broxton filed an infrastructure bill that would prohibit you from access to certain state funding and grants if you were transferring utility revenues to your general fund for anything but for indirect costs, as you mentioned, whether, portions of your city manager's salary or HR or finance team or what have you. It wouldn't prohibit you from doing it. It just would prohibit you from receiving state funding. And so, this session, and we are, 8 days away, but 6, days away from session ending. And so, knock on wood, nothing is completely dead until the hanky drops. But because of the information that we've received from many of your utilities on your policy, your rate policy, your transfer policy, learning, how devastating this would be to your city, especially for small cities who, tax base doesn't yield a huge amount of dollars to do the basic functions of your city. We were able to strategically target members of the legislature to share in what you all are doing in your cities to justify these transfer and to show them how huge this would be if you were, one, prohibited from doing it, and two, prohibited from receiving state funding. In talking to Representative Find, his particular issue was those areas that are outside the immediate service areas does not receive sort of any kind of direct benefit when it's in the general fund. Obviously, you don't have to live within a city or county commission meeting, to get your 3 minutes of to share whatever you want. But his thinking was that, he who lives outside that service area doesn't benefit. And we sort of pushed back that, you live in the county, but you walk on city sidewalks when you come in town, you visit parks when you come into town. So there although there may not be a direct benefit because you're not living within the service areas, there are indirect benefits. In talking to Senator Broxson and some of the other members, they were sort of, tired of cities coming complaining that they need all these kinds of infrastructure dollars, and that they had enough money to, ensure the upkeep of the various utility infrastructures within their own power. They thought, I think Al used cash cow, they call it a slush fund. They thought that cities were using, or utilities were using these as slush funds, for new city halls or what have you. And so we spent the last 2 months, reviewing data and policies of about 30 different utilities that we could strategically target members that we thought were on our side. Those members consisted of members who were in rural areas that really depend on these utility transfers to carry out just the basic function of the city. Those who had great working relationship with their city officials. And so on the Senate side, we knew that the bill was not going to get heard at all. We just knew it. One of the particular senators that sits on that committee, Senator Albritton from Polk County area, in particular, offices in Wauchula, who has a utility and is slated to be Senate president in about 3 years. We knew once he said, hey, he was not in favor of this bill, we had a fighting chance on the Senate side. On the House side, which was a little bit more difficult, and so we, part of our process in getting it not heard was to really depend on our city officials and telling and sharing that story. And when we get to the next bullet point, or next question, or I'll sort of share with you what we need to do in the interim once session is over, because I'm sure that this bill will be back next session. It's sort of has a shelf life of 3 years and it goes away and then it comes back. And so we are on shelf life number 2. And so we were able to talk to the chairman of the House, who is from Northwest area. And so a lot of his rural cities have utility operated on municipal utilities, and certainly he got it. And so because we built that coalition and put enough pressure, the bill never got heard. And knock on wood, no funny business will happen these last 8 days. And this will, die without having a committee hearing, and then the real work begins. And so that's sort of the behind the scenes inside baseball of this particular bill. And it's as important as that, you continue to, have a good working relationship with the elected officials that represent your area, so they know that you're not just using this, as a cash cow or a slush fund. You have the audits and studies to show you that you are abiding by your policy, the letter of the policy, and the letter of the law. Steve?
And just to add that, it's good to see the process working. And I know, there's a need, there's a flag that goes up that says, uh-oh, this is a problem. This is going to be an issue to some group or some cities, like some of the other legislation that's out there. But the process, and I guess this is a plug, Jeff, for FLC and your group, that there's a methodology to get things addressed. And once you start doing that, then it's kind of it makes more sense to everybody when more data is out. And that's one of the things on the, thank you and the other parties that were part of this from your group that, got this information out, that, one of the worst things they can do is make a decision off of half information. And the fact that you all were giving them more information made it a lot easier for them to see. So,
Yeah, we, and to that, even if there was just one city or county out there that was an outlier in doing transfers not according to their policy, doesn't mean that the other, 410 cities or other 600 or other 66 counties that are doing it correctly, that we have to have this broad swipe of this bill. We can, you all are part of the municipal associate or electric association, mini association. And so maybe they just need, extra help and guidance. Let's not penalize everyone. Let's provide the necessary, much needed information and help that's out there to help a city who, or county utility who's not, transferring according to their policy, or the transfer is too high, or they're not, reinvesting into their infrastructure. And so, it is, every session, it's a re-educating of what we educated the previous session and the previous session before that. And, us at the league and you all on the ground, we have a true partnership, and we have, great responsibilities that we must do when they're here and then when they're back at home.
well, the last area, I guess, or question that we want to look at today is, I guess, each of us individually, what are some takeaways from the webinar? What are some things that, as we go forward, some of the questions that some of you may have, just what is it that we really want the group that are attended or electronically to hear? So we've got it right at 10 minutes. If I could get the four, you three and myself, to take about 2 minutes, give a quick takeaway here as we go. This is what I want you all to remember. I would appreciate that. And Jeff, since you were talking and you had to wait, you go first, and then you'll go next, Julie, and then I'll finish it up.
Cool, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for all our participants being on and taking time out your busy day to listen to what we had to say. Session ends March 11th. Now there's talks of special session, but regular session ends March 11th. And not just on this particular topic of utilities, but all topics that or issues that affect your city. When they're back at home, you have to ensure that you're building relationships with your Florida delegation, whether that is, asking them to come and shadow a particular department, or talking about issues such as this that will, in 8 days, die, the bill will die, getting the jump start on educating them. And so that's one. Advocacy is important. We always have to, advocate on our behalf, and that's, bottom line of education. But two, justifying, what, why the transfer is happening, whether it's, through a cost allocation plan or doing a rate study, whatever it may be, ensuring that you're justifying it. And that, educating and justifying will go a long way and will continue to be a tool for us to justify why some of these preemption bills aren't needed, because our cities and counties are doing, the right thing according to their policy. Their audits are clear, their ratings are high, and just because a particular city or county is not doing what they're not supposed to do, if that is the case, doesn't justify why the rest of the cities and counties should be penalized. So justifying what you're doing and ensuring that you are advocating and building that relationship with your Florida senator or Florida representative. Thank you.
Well,
I just be a utility first, manage your utility systems, be rooted and know what your rate is all the time. So I got to mention the FMEA site, Florida Municipal Electric Association. They do a great job representing us, working with Jeff. And they also do a good job. They of keeping a roll and scale of every municipal utility in the state, what our rates are versus our competitors, being Florida Power, TECO, Duke. And so just be a utility first, watch your rates, and take care of your system.
Julie?
Great. I don't have too much to add because I feel like everybody's pretty much summarized their points pretty well. I think just one of the takeaways, it sounds like even though the scale of utilities might be different for all of us, we all pretty much have the same theme, which is, we're really just trying to serve our communities in the best way possible, being transparent and making sure that everybody has the resources they need. Utilities are essential, and so just making sure that we're able to be a utility first and deliver those products while also being a benefit to our communities. But pretty much that's my takeaway.
Well, thank you. We all have yielded your time, and I've got 5 minutes, so I'll try to use about 3 of it and then let Bob wind up if we have any questions. A few takeaways that I have is that a transfer is not a bad word. There sometimes are perspective of that. A utility that is run properly, as I referenced earlier, and they manage everything they do, their finances, their operations, then it makes sense and it is a logical use of their funds. To add on to that, transfers, I wrote this down so I make sure I covered all. Transfers should only be made after covering utility M&O costs, CIP, reserve contributions, debt service, depreciation, infrastructure reinvestment, and contingencies. So if Jeff and Julie and the other utilities in the state, that municipal utilities that function in this way, if you're going to make a transfer, make sure you do it after you've covered these other areas. Keep the fact that you use a utility transfer strategic and financially sound. Don't make it just an arbitrary amount, and that comes with education of the elected officials. Cash cow is a term I've heard my entire career, and again, that's going to run out eventually. And last 2 points, you should have rate studies at least every 5 years, and to keep what you're doing relative and current, and making sure that there's some allocation that's not out there that you're not taking into account, or that you're placing too much of an obligation on certain parts of your what's in your rate. And then my rule, you never raise utility rates just to make a utility transfer. That is the absolute worst thing you can do. So with that, Mr. Bob, we've got 2 minutes left. I will turn it back over to you for any questions and whatever we may have. And thank everyone for attending and listening in. And panelists, thank you all.
Thank you, Steve. And yes, let me just echo to you, Steve, Julie, Jeff, Al. Very insightful. I appreciate you sharing your personal experiences with your agencies. Just a real quick story as an example with the legislators. Many of them always thinking one size fits all at the local level. Look at the city of Chattahoochee. I think they may have as many as 4 utilities. Their total ad valorem property tax, the last I looked at, was somewhere between $28,000 and $30,000 a year. They run their municipal services dependent upon utilities because of the mandates from the state that constrain the use of ad valorem or the raising of ad valorem taxes due to state lands and property that's located in their city, as well as the value of properties that are below the threshold. So one size doesn't fit all. And in some cases, in that particular case, I'm sure their formula would be even different than the 3 that we talked about today. So again, I want to thank you all for taking your time and preparing this for the attendees today. Also want to quickly reference and thank the Professional Development Committee, Steve, that committee that you're on, for organizing these webinars. And finally, to express appreciation to the Board of Directors of FCCMA for continuing to provide these at no cost monthly webinars for their membership. With those final comments, let me just also mention that there will be an evaluation that's going to pop up as soon as we adjourn. Hopefully attendees will take a couple moments and complete it. With those final comments, thank you all again for your participation, and we're now adjourned.
Thank you, Bob.